Hello everybody, this is Graeme and today we're looking at a game called Fromage. In Fromage you take on the role of a French cheesemaker in the early 20th century. You're making and selling your artisan cheeses throughout France to try and get the recognition for your delicious, delicious cheese. Now the main mechanism of this game is a simultaneous worker placement. There are 4 quadrants of the game board, and on each turn you can take one cheese and collect the resources from the quadrant that is currently in front of you. Once each player has placed up to 2 workers, you rotate the board 90 degrees, now you have your new quadrant to take actions in. And to go along with that, the other interesting mechanism is that depending on how powerful the action is, the longer your worker has to stay in that spot, and you only have 3 workers to use. You get your workers back when they're facing you after the board has been rotated. Collecting 1 resource or making 1 unaged cheese means you're going to get your worker back next round. But of course, to make that better, older cheese, or to collect 3 resources, it will take 3 turns to get your worker back. So this game is all about forward planning. Each quadrant scores differently at the end of the game, and managing the ebb and flow of your workers is probably the most important aspect. So, will this game be like a tasty piece of cheese, or does it need to be thrown in the trash like that moldy old piece of cheese long forgotten in the back of the fridge? Let's get at the table, see how it's played, and we'll come back with my final thoughts on Fromage. Here's Fromage set up. The main board is 4 jigsaw sections that can be put in any order. By default, the game is set up for 4 players, but if you're playing with a different number of players, or want an alternative 4-player area, you can insert the new inserts into the pieces. In the Ville section, randomly place the score markers, and all other components are placed in their storage trays. All the animals are identical, even though the picture for them is a cow that represents all the livestock. And they all work in the same way and are all interchangeable. It's the same with the fruit and the building resources. Each player has 15 cheese tokens of their color and 3 workers, each worker for a different type of cheese: soft, hard, and blue cheese. Each player takes a random player board. They're all slightly different, but they all work identically. Then collect your starting resources based on where you sit and place them to the left of their row. If you get order cards, they are placed face up to the left of your board. The game is played over a number of rounds until one player has made all of their cheese. On a turn, players will simultaneously take an action in their quadrant that is in front of them. You can gather resources or ingredients once, and you can make 1 cheese. Once all players have done, the board is rotated 90 degrees, so then you do the same thing in the next quadrant that is in front of you. At the start of a turn, you will return any worker that is currently facing you. So in this situation, where in previous turns you have placed a worker here and here, you'd return this one because it is now facing you, but not this one, as it will require 1 more turn before the worker is returned. When returning workers, always leave the cheese behind as it is now done, and return your worker so they can be used to create more delicious cheese. Once all players have returned their workers, players will take their turns at the same time. They can only work within the quadrant that is currently in front of them, and they can gather resources once per turn, that is, place any of their available workers without a cheese token in the resource area of their quadrant, pointing in the direction as the resource cheese. You'll immediately take those resources. The other action you can do is make cheese. All the empty cheese spaces in your quadrant will show you a type of cheese: soft, hard, or blue, and how long it will take to age. To make a cheese, you place one of your cheese tokens on the spot and place a worker matching the color of the cheese on top, making sure to point it in the proper direction. And you can do these in either order, and you do not need to do both on every turn, and often you might only have 1 worker to place anyway. Now some cheeses also have fruit requirements in them. In these cases, you must have a fruit on your board on your left side to be converted into either fruit or jam. So to make this cheese here, I would need to use one of my fruit from my basket and move it over to the appropriate section. And once it has been used to make cheese, it can't be used again. You would need to collect more fruit to make more fruit cheeses. Now since we're talking about fruit, let's talk about the other resources. You have buildings which are used to build structures across the top of your board. At any time on your turn, and this does not require a worker, you can use your buildings to completely build one of the structures. And it must be completely built at one time, so you can't add a building at a time to a structure. Once it's built, it is immediately usable. The first one is an activation spot that only you can send a worker to collect one of those resources. The next 2 are ongoing abilities. One is whenever you get a resource of a certain type, then you get 1 more on that turn. Next is when you make cheese in a certain quadrant, you get the resource shown. And the last one is a unique scoring opportunity for you. Remember, these have to be built before you can use their abilities. The next resources are the animals. Animals can be used at any time on your turn to create cheese without a worker. When you place the required number of animals on a barn, you could create that depicted cheese, which must be then immediately placed in the quadrant that is in front of you. Now each barn is a one-time use, so when you place the animals on the barn, they're left there for the entire game. We've talked about the fruit, so the last resource are the cards. Cards face up on the left are orders for you to fulfill. The next time you create that specific cheese from that project card, flip it face down and place it to the right. These cards are not retroactive, so if you pick up a card with a cheese you've already created, you cannot claim this one is complete. You have to do another cheese that meets that requirement. So these are the resources. But why are you making cheese in the first place? Well, of course, to get points. Each quadrant will score at the end of the game in a different way. The festival scores by having a line of orthogonally adjacent cheese. The longer the line, the more points. There are wild cheeses that can be part for all players' lines if they're adjacent to them. If you have multiple lines, you score each line separately. The fromagerie scores by having cheese on different shelves. The more shelves you have cheese on, the more points you get. When you make a cheese in the fromagerie, as soon as you place a cheese on the left shelves, you get the depicted bonus. For the right shelves, those are end of game points. The bistro scores by having pairs of cheese on a table. First, you see how many tables you have both of your cheese on. You then use the chart to see how much each of your plates worth. So, if I have these two pairs, you would score all of your plates in the bistro using the second line. And finally is the Wild quadrant. This is just area majority. Each area is worth a different number of points depicted on the random icon. The gold-plated cheese are always connected to 3 areas, silver to 2, and bronze to 1. So this cheese here counts for this area, and this area when figuring out who has the most cheese in each area. If there is any tie for the area at the end of the game, all tied players score the tied points. The game ends when someone places their last cheese. As soon as it happens, all players finish their current placement, then the game ends immediately. All workers are removed from the board so that all the cheese is instantly done in this last turn. Then, score the 4 quadrants as previously explained. Then any scoring structures that are complete are scored. Your used fruit then scores. You multiply one basket by the other. Completed order cards are scored on the chart on the right hand of your board. And finally, your leftover resources. That is buildings, livestock, fruit, and cards which have not been completed or used, but not unmade cheese, and you score 1 point for every 2 of these leftover resources. Then, the player with the most points is the winner. Let's get back to see what I thought about Fromage. On to theme and components. I'm going to admit right up front, I'm a cheese lover and an absolute sucker for this theme. And this theme is less about cheese actual making, and more about maybe cheese finishing and cheese showing. But I'm okay with that. But I love how everything is tied into that theme. Every mechanism is tied to that making or producing cheese. You're gathering resources to make your farm better and fruits to go in your cheese, or you're assigning your workers to make certain types of cheese. And the longer you want that cheese to be aged, the more time your workers need to spend aging that cheese. And I love that there's a little pamphlet here that talks about the different types of cheeses. And on the inside, there's actually a cheese and board game pairing guide. Just a little more theme to the game. For the components themselves, they're fine and functional. I like the resources on the main board for your workers, so it's very hard not to get them in the correct orientation. The cardboard components are good as well, and I like the little touch of making them, slightly different. There are different types of animals, but they all function identically. But I must say, I do love these order cards with all the different cheeses on them. Yes, the only thing that matters is that little thing in the corner that tells you what type of cheese and how long it needs to be aged, but just all the different types of cheeses. I loved looking through all these and kind of getting hungry looking at all these types of cheeses. These don't mean anything. Again, it's just the top corner, but I love that every card is different. And when I first got the game, I wasn't sure about the turning of the board, of how it's going to stand up throughout repeated plays, but for all my plays, I've never had a problem with it falling apart or catching on anything. So let's go on to the gameplay. I really like the simultaneous worker placement of this game. It makes turns go so quick, and combined with the fact that each player only has 15 cheese tokens, and as soon as one person is out, the game is over. Often games are only lasting maybe 13, 14 rounds, so the game is quick, and it's really not affected by player count. So you're usually done in 30 to 40 minutes or so, and even though this is reasonably quick, I still feel you got a really good solid game out of it. For me, the best part of the game is definitely planning of when my workers are going to be returning. I'm always kind of looking to the right to see what boards are coming up, to see whether I can plan what worker to use now, so I have the right worker back when that board comes, to my quadrant. This is not to say this game is highly strategic game. You're going to be sitting there planning for minutes to decide what workers are going to be coming back, as it's definitely more of a tactical game because the other players are going to be placing their cheese in the same areas that you want to place them. So you need to be able to assess what's in front of you to figure out what the best move is, combined with some forward planning to say, well, I can use this one now so I can get it back to use it here. I like that the different areas of the board score differently. but I do find the scoring not overly interesting on some of the boards. I do wish that the inserts used to change up the cheese type also changed up the scoring for the areas, or there were cards that you could kind of shuffle through that said, this time the bistro scores like this. And speaking of these inserts, I do like them for changing up the player count. You know, you just slide them into the board and it blocks off certain cheeses. And each one is double-sided, but there really doesn't seem to be much difference between the sides. The only thing that seems to change is the type of cheese and if it needs fruit or not. The age of the cheese is set by the main board, so these are just kind of changing up, you know, the type of cheeses, as I said. And to give the game some more replayability, there are buildings you can draft at the beginning of the game, which I, again, also enjoyed. And there's something you want to do after a few plays, because your player boards, although they are different, this makes them even more different. So, would I recommend Fromage? Definitely. It's a medium light game with quick turns, little downtime, and a really fun main mechanism of deciding how powerful you want your worker to be this round at the sacrifice of not getting it back for a few turns. And I just really like that main mechanism, and it was by far what most of my decision making was on my turn. How long can I afford my blue worker to be tied up? Do I need it for the next board, or can I wait? It's not too complicated a decision, but still it was a fun decision. I liked how incredibly fast the game felt, probably because there's next to no downtime on your turn. I liked the cheese theme and the little touches they added to the game. I liked that there were different ways to score, and each region you had to approach it, you know, slightly differently. I also enjoyed the ability to build up my farm, and there were personal ways I could score points as well. You know, the cards, getting more cards was always good, and there's usually a unique scoring building on my player board. So I always felt I had a lot of options on how to score. For the negatives, and for me there really is only one major one, and that's the scoring is the same in every game. And I wish it changed up from game to game, at least on the main board. Your personal player boards can offer some slight changes to scoring. The scoring that's on the main board is fine for the first few plays, but once people understand the game, they're going to be going after the same spots because that's how you score in that region. Considering you have player inserts on the board, it feels like a missed opportunity not to introduce different scorings on the second side of these inserts. Overall though, I'm going to give this one a 7.5 out of 10 and a Dice Tower seal of approval. If you're looking for, you know, something that's quick playing that still gives you some interesting decisions to be made with almost no downtime, this is definitely one you want to check out. Or if you or someone you know just absolutely loves cheese, this is a must buy. Honestly, just for these order cards. But that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Hey folks, thanks for joining us for that video. If you haven't yet, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hey, make sure you check out what's happening, where I'll cover an app on an iOS or a Switch device, and you can check it out along with me. Thanks very much. You've been watching The Dice Tower.